My name is Lester Ferguson. I serve as the Executive Secretary for the National Commission for Persons with Disabilities, and as head of the Secretariat, I have responsibility for ensuring that all of the business and all of the decisions of the Commission are carried out in connection with the legislation. The Persons with Disabilities Equal Opportunities Act 2014 came about out of a need to recognize that persons with disabilities, whether they are sensory disabilities, physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, disabilities that relate from health challenges, there was a need for them to be recognized and respected for their own dignity and value and the contribution that they are able to make to society. So the Persons with Disabilities Act really seeks to end discrimination against persons with disabilities in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. That's a very broad definition of what the Act is. More specifically, in the areas of healthcare and employment, for example, transportation and building accessibility, it means that all of these services and provisions must be accessible for persons with disabilities. And as we often say, that access means more than a ramp. It means making administrative adjustments sometimes, or program adjustments sometimes, in order to accommodate the needs of persons with disabilities. The Act, the Persons with Disabilities Act, also established the National Commission for Persons with Disabilities, and that is a body of 15 commissioners, as mandated by the Act, who have the responsibility of ensuring the implementation of the provisions of the Act. So in essence, the commissioners, the National Commission members, are the guardians of the legislation to ensure that it does what it is supposed to do, what it is intended to do. And that's a huge responsibility. It means that the Commission has responsibility for ensuring that the public at large is aware of the Act. So they have duties with regards to public education and awareness, making sure that that everyone is aware of the Act, not just persons with disabilities, but corporate community, other government agencies and ministries, and understand what their obligations are with regards to the Act. The Commission has been in operation for about 3 years now and has undertaken quite a number of initiatives, public education and awareness being one of them. The registration of persons with disabilities, that's a very important function of the Commission. It's important to be able to quantify the issue of persons with disabilities in the Bahamas. So for example, if we talk about the fact that transportation is a huge issue, the lack of accessible transportation is a huge issue for persons with disabilities. But what does it mean? What does it look like? How many people are we talking about? So it's important for persons to register in order to be included in the policies and the decisions that the Commission makes from time to time, so that everybody with a disability should register, not just persons who feel they may rely on government services. No, everyone should register, and registration is quite open. Persons can go to the Commission's website, www.disabilitiescommissionbahamas.org. And there they can find the registration form. They can register right online, provide the 2 documents, identification documents that are required. And that's, again, it's a very important means of helping the Commission to decide and to help to make recommendations on policy matters that relate to accessibility or healthcare or transportation, etc. So it's absolutely critical for persons with disabilities to register. And again, they can do that by our website, stopping by the Commission's office, stopping by Disability Affairs. A number of the disability NGOs also have registration forms, and those are avenues and channels through which persons with disabilities can also register. The Commission is also responsible for engaging with other government entities to ensure that those government ministries and entities comply with the provisions of the Act, that they meet their own requirements. For example, the Commission has been working with the Ministry of Works and having dialogue with the Ministry of Works with regards to building infrastructure and sidewalk infrastructure and so on. The Commission has been working with the Ministry of Transport on the issue of accessible public transportation and the obligation that the Bahamas, as a state party that ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that there's an obligation that we have to fulfill with regards to accessible public transportation. So there are any other number of issues. The Commission has also been very actively involved in helping to strengthen the capacity of the community of persons with disabilities, because we recognize that persons with disabilities and their families are their own best advocates. And so we work very closely with the various NGOs, disability-related NGOs, in helping them to strengthen their own capacity to be able to meet the needs of the persons in their particular communities or their particular constituents. So advocacy training is an important part of what we do. We do quite a bit of sensitivity training as well. We have been called upon from time to time by the public sector, by the corporate community to do assessments of their buildings and their services to ensure that they are accessible. There are any number of functions that the Commission undertakes in order to ensure that the legislation is at work on behalf of persons with disabilities. We have, on the Commission's website, persons can find the legislation. They can find some other material, promotional material with regards to our brochures, our annual reports. All of those are, and other resources are available online, again, at disabilitiescommissionbahamas.org. And of course, our doors are always open. Our telephone lines are available for persons to call if they wish to ask questions or to be able to make a complaint. That's another very important function of the Commission, to address complaints of abuse or breaches of the Persons with Disabilities Act. And one of the things that we try to emphasize to persons before they make a complaint is to ensure that they have been able to make redress to the party that they're complaining about first. And once they have exhausted that recourse, then they can come to the Commission. We always say that with rights come responsibility. And it's important for us to understand what those rights are in order for us to exercise those rights. The provisions of the Persons with Disabilities Act are not necessarily new. You know, the whole thing about respecting the individuality of persons regardless of their disability, that's not new. In fact, that's enshrined our respect for individuals and for the rights of individuals. Those are enshrined in our Constitution, in the Bahamas Constitution. In fact, we go back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We find that therein contains the mechanism for every single human being to be respected and valued for who they are. And that includes persons with disabilities. We've come a long way as a country in terms of promoting and protecting the rights of persons with disabilities. There is so much more that needs to be done, but we certainly have come a long way in making sure that that persons with disabilities are included in society. One of the important parts of the Act speaks to including persons with disabilities in society. And for, as many people would know, for too long, persons with disabilities have been disenfranchised, have been marginalized, have been pushed to a back room somewhere and not paid attention to. When there is so much potential and that there is so much that persons with disabilities can offer, especially when they are afforded the same kinds of educational opportunities and training opportunities and employment opportunities that everybody else enjoys. And so we want to be ensured that the Bahamas that we live in is one that is enjoyed and by everybody, including persons with disabilities, because they have their important contribution to make to our national development. The Persons with Disabilities Equal Opportunities Act is just that. It's an Equal Opportunities Act. It's a mechanism that protects the rights of persons with disabilities to participate, to function, to benefit equally in society. And it's a huge human rights instrument and social justice instrument. And the Bahamas is one of the few countries in the Caribbean, in the region, to have legislation in place, local legislation that protects the rights of persons with disabilities. The entire act is in force, and that's a question that we get from time to time. Well, when does this particular provision come in force? Well, the answer is the entire Disabilities Act is already in force, with the exception of Section 21 that speaks to building accessibility. There was a 2-year window for that particular part of the Act to come into full effect. And so on midnight, December the 31st, 2017, this year, that 2-year window expires. So that on January 1st, 2018, all buildings that are open to the public are expected to be in compliance with that section of the Act. And that means that supermarkets and banks and churches and schools and government agencies, medical centers, financial institutions, shops, any building that is open to the public for business or for the public to come in must be accessible for persons with disabilities. And again, that comes into full effect on January 1st, 2018. A lot of businesses, for example, ask, well, what does accessibility mean? What does it mean for me to make my business or my establishment accessible? And we, again, have information on the website in terms of the parking accessibility chart, the building accessibility chart, and they can be downloaded and reviewed. And those documents are in concert with the Bahamas Building Code, which already stipulates a lot of the accessibility features and measures that we talk about from time to time. So that's important to note, that January 1st, 2018, all buildings must be accessible to persons with disabilities. And after that date, persons with disabilities have a right to complain, have a right to seek legal redress from the Commission through the issuance of adjustment orders and other legal representation to make sure that they have full access to businesses that are open to the public. One of the important things to note is that the Commission is here to provide the information and the guidance and any advice that is necessary in order for the general public to understand what the Act means and what their particular roles are. The Commission has a Secretariat that provides all of the duties and the functions of the Commission, and the full-time Secretariat is available to the public for any queries or questions or advice that is sought in order for persons to ensure that they are compliant with the Disabilities Act. For complaints, persons are welcome to call the Commission's Secretariat to find out what the process is for making a formal complaint if they feel that their rights have been violated as per the Persons with Disabilities Act. The landline for the Secretariat is 397-8623, and our offices are open from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Our email address is disabilitiescommissionbahamas, one word, @gmail.com. That's disabilitiescommissionbahamas@gmail.com. For those persons who are deaf or hard of hearing, we also have a text or WhatsApp service, and that number is 376-8238. The location is the Ventura Plaza on the corner of Bethel Avenue and JFK Drive. We are situated in the Ministry of Social Services headquarters building on JFK Drive and Bethel Avenue. And again, our offices are from Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And the general public quite welcome to call, to make an inquiry, to ask a question. We are happy to help.